All right. Hey everyone, welcome back. I've got the video uploaded. So we're on part four now. We're going to dive into psychological studies, sketches, and really try to make it through like 15 pages in this video. I again hope to not explain as much. Just kind of for context, that just take like 20 or 30 minutes for me to process, for my computer to process the video and convert it, for Zoom to convert it. So as soon as the meeting ends, Zoom has to convert the video into like the recording. Um, yeah. So I've got everything pulled up for us. So let's right here. This is the top, middle of page, close to the bottom of page 142 in my copy. Um, Again, I encourage you to follow along in your own copy. If you're just staring at me, it's probably going to be pretty boring. Philosophy is pretty mental. Follow the idea. You can look at the page. That's why I have it so large. And as I may do hand things, but I'll try to, when I'm reading, it's probably just follow along in your own text. Um, Underline things, write notes. Okay. Psychology, in fact, like the other, like for context, I've done this in a classroom setting where I just read to the students and they follow along, and take notes, annotate, write things down that I say and explain, draw diagrams that I draw. A lot of modeling and just conveying information and processing the text together. They ask questions. So you can totally do that too. It may not be obvious because you don't see anybody doing it around you in an independent setting, but you can do that too. Okay. Psychology, in fact, like the other sciences, proceeds by analysis. This was the last paragraph I read. I'm just rereading it. So you probably already have it marked up if you've been following along in the other videos and doing the annotations. And if you haven't been annotating, I encourage you to go back to the other videos and do the annotations or reread it again on your own, do the annotations. But they really help your it's not appropriate to be frustrated with your grade if you aren't really chewing on the material to achieve the excellence of density and communication, sophistication of communication, that I expect on the exams in such a tight window. And if you don't see, if you're not pacing yourself like holding yourself accountable on the other end of this video. So uh, chew on the stuff. All right. So yeah, if you haven't been annotating, go back, just do the work. It resolves the self first given to it in the form of a simple intuition into sensations, feelings, images, etc., which it studies separately. It therefore substitutes for the self a series of elements, which are the psychological facts. But these elements, are they parts? That is the whole question. And it is because we have evaded it that we have often stated in insoluble terms the problem of the human personality. It is undeniable that any psychological state, by the sole fact that it belongs to a person, reflects the whole of a personality. So again, when we think of whole, we're thinking of the one, but maybe a one that's also a many, and we're thinking of eminence. I don't want to. Okay, let's keep going. There is no feeling, no matter how simple, which does not virtually contain the past and present of the being which experiences it, which can be separated from it and constitute a quote state, other than by an effort of abstraction or analysis. But it is no less undeniable that without this effort of abstraction or analysis, there would be no possible development of psychological science. Now, of what does the operation consist by which the psychologist attaches a psychological state in order to set it up as a more or less independent entity? Independent entity. He begins by disregarding the person's special coloration, which can be expressed only in common and known terms. He then strives to isolate in the person thus already simplified this or that aspect which lends itself to an interesting study. If, for example, it is a question of inclination, he will leave out of account the inexpressible shading which colors it, and which brings it about that my inclination is not yours. He will then fix his attention on the movement by which our personality tends towards a certain object. He will isolate this attitude, and it is this special aspect of the person, this point of view on the mobility of the inner life, this schema of the concrete inclination which he will set up as an independent fact, It is there in this there is a work analogous to that of an artist who okay, so this is the transition from this psychological studies to the sketch of the Tower of Notre Dame in Paris. Um, just both of these meant to express kind of the relation between intuition versus analysis, elements versus parts, whole versus discrete cut up things, perspectives. Analyses are also perspectives, so parts are perspectival. You only get one vantage on something that has lots of different vantage points and also lots of different interactions with different situations and different zones of affects, different fields of influence. Um, Inclination plays itself out for me differently than it plays itself out for you. Okay. In this, there is a work analogous to that of an artist who, on a visit to Paris, would, for example, make a sketch of a tower of Notre Dame. The tower is an inseparable part of the edifice, which is no less inseparably a part of the soil, the surroundings, the whole of Paris, etc. So he's going to sketch the tower. I'm just going to take a second to pause here. He must begin by detaching it. That's what I'm doing. I'm detaching the primary text and trying to communicate certain aspects of it to you with certain modifications affectively necessary based on my perception of it, which is most of what it's saying, but not all of what it's saying. Um, because I've studied it a lot, so that's why it's more than just some of it. Okay, but the sketch. This art, the tower, let's say, is surrounded by cafes, and the sun is hitting these cafes and bouncing off of them in certain ways that creates a glow in the atmosphere. And this glow, at a certain time of day is causing, and the particular angle the artist is coming at it from, and let's go another step further, the particular ocular deterioration of the artist, right? The extent to which they have been impacted by their capacity for sight itself has been impacted. It will blur, it will augment the amount of astigmatism. How does their brain stabilize it? All of these things impact what they do, how they do it. And as psychology develops, we get more, or phenomenology, even better, as Sartre shows us. Again, all of that, the artist themselves, the history of the artist, the place, the time of the place, and the things outside the place. All of those are impacting the event. To some extent, the history of the place is also impacting the event because the place in the present expresses the history, right? And that's a way that the the position, the present, expresses the whole. It's an element, it's not a part. The things like I ask my students, is there a favorite like food or drink or song that you love and you get it often or you listen to it? Um, and they tell me what it is. So think of yours. I love lavenders, lavender flavors, lavender things. Um, or let's do mole. I love, it's a weird one. It's not super sweet. I didn't know about it. I didn't used to know about it. But I love mole now and I get it whenever I'm missing my ex-partner. So ultimately, when I ask, what are your favorite things, you end up picking something that has a sentimental connection. Or it has, if I can ask another question a step further, that's something like, why is that your favorite thing? Is there some part of your history? And in the instances where they go, no, I just love the thing. I go, okay, well, is there something else like this? Is there something that you um, love for a person or from an experience? Um, Somebody said pizza, and it just reminds them of growing up. Because and I'm like, oh, spending time with family. And they're like, yeah, actually, it reminds me of community events with my parents, my grandparents, stuff like that. I love this. Uh, I'm not going to say any copywritten beverages like any famous coffee chains, but students walk into class with those things and like, oh, what are you drinking? A vanilla blended iced cold dairy beverage. with caffeine in it. Oh, cool. Why do you like that? My best friend growing up showed it to me, and now when I miss her, I get it. I think it's one of my students actually said something like that. Um, the point is that I'm trying to ask you these questions too, and if you think about them and answer them, you're like, oh, there are reasons I do things that are way back here 20 years ago, and I can see how it's expressing itself in the present. I can see how I am constituted by my history and my affective necessities, my intuition of concrete duration. So Bergson really does not use the language of Spinoza, does not use the language of affect or historical materialism, but it's what it is. It's just here with Bergson, we get a sort of interiority, an eidetics, a methodology, an epistemology, a metaphysics as well. But it is an epistemology because it tells us how we can know what truth is. But that's by accessing and becoming identical to the reality itself, which is a metaphysics. But it's nice, it's fluent, or it's intuitive and elegant. It's an elegant solution that way because it solves dual problems that it's hard to figure out like why you should solve one versus the other first. What is there and how do we know it's there? Or you try to answer a question and then you go, wait, how do I know what an answer is? How do I know what truth is? How can I, what is there? How do I know it's there? Um, how do I know what's there? So that's when you start with the epistemology, which I think is better. I think I've done that for about a decade now. I think that's what like early Plato does, where it's just the Socratic dialogues, critiquing things and taking them apart. And then in the middle dialogues, Plato is not more short, but he starts to posit theories and solutions and come to some kind of positions. And late dialogues, he's just more sure of those positions and is more assertive. Let's keep going. Oh right, so the tower, light hits it, everything hits it. All of that stuff is communicated in the analysis, in the sketch of the tower, in the knowledge, in the object, in the thingness, in the concept, in the language, in the word, in the sentence, in the symbol. But the intuition is there. Um, so the artist may not sketch all the particular nuances of the bricks, but they will capture the impacts of those nuances. They may not get the cafe lit up by the sun, but they will capture a certain lighting of the tower because the cafes have the light bouncing. Okay, let's keep reading. He must begin by detaching it. He will focus only on a certain aspect of the whole, and that aspect is this tower of Notre Dame. Now, the tower is in reality constituted of stones, whose particular grouping is what gives it its form. So I was saying about the smaller details of the composition of the stones and the structure. But the sketcher is not interested in the stones. He only notices the silhouette of the tower. He substitutes for the real and internal organization of the thing an external and schematic reconstitution. So it's a reduction. Any communication is a reduction. Any sentence is a reduction. Any partial expression, any elemental expression is a reduction. But it is an element, it's not a part. It is the intuition is communicated in the sketch as an element, if you understand that. And basically what he says is if you've been to Paris, the reduction still produces the fullness that you expect and remember because you've been there. One of my students explained it really well. They said like it's like drawing a map. And if you've been to the on those streets before, then the map reminds you of the streets. You can look at or if you see friends going on vacation, they take pictures, you can like imagine so much of it if you've actually been and done those things. Um, if you know a lot of other philosophers, then the intertextuality of the memory of consciousness, or the consciousness of memory, which is the same thing for Bergson, really enriches all of that all at once. Uh, Now, the same holds for the operation by which the psychologist extracts a psychological state from the whole person. This isolated psychological state is scarcely more than a sketch, the beginning of an artificial recomposition. It is the whole envisaged under a certain elementary aspect in which one has become especially interested and which one has taken care to note. It is not a part, but an element. It has not been obtained by fragmentation, but by analysis. And so elements are still analysis. But they communicate the intuition to people who can access it. And I think that you can teach people, which means that you can augment and expand intuition through communication, which is otherwise analysis. So there has to be some relation between them that is not strict. It's strictly one dimensional, one directional, but it's not futile. Now, at the bottom of all the sketches made in Paris, the stranger will probably write Paris by way of reminder. And as he has really seen Paris, he will be able, by descending from the original intuition of the whole, to place his sketches in it and thus arrange them in relation to one another. But there is no way of performing the opposite operation. Even with an infinity of sketches as exact as you like, even with the word Paris to indicate that these must bear close connection, it is impossible to travel back to an intuition one has not had and gain the impression of Paris if one has never seen Paris. The point is that we are not dealing here with parts of the whole, but with notes taken on the thing as a whole. To choose a more striking example, where the notation is more completely symbolical, let us suppose someone puts before me all jumbled together the letters which go to make up a poem, without my knowing which poem it is. If the letters were parts of the poem, I could attempt to reconstruct it with them by trying various possible arrangements, as a child does with the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. But I shall not for an instant think of attempting it, because the letters are not component parts, but partial expressions, which is quite another thing. That is why, if I know the poem, I put each one of the letters in its proper place and link them together without difficulty in one continuous chain, while the reverse operation is impossible. Even when I take it into my head to try that reverse operation, even when I place the letters end to end, I begin by imagining a plausible meaning. I thus give myself an intuition, and it is from the intuition that I try to fall back on the elementary symbols which would recreate its expression. In other words, you plug and play, you play test possible abductive solutions. That's what abduction is trying to say. Like, what arrangement fits the best? Dewey, for example, Pierce is the one that calls. Pierce talks about abduction. I'm going to take a step back because I don't want to say what he talks about abduction as. I believe I remember Deleuze saying that for Pierce, abduction is a sort of knowingness of the thing as it is in the world with its like properties and experience. Like a brute givenness of phenomena. But that may be wrong. That's not what it means in relation to deduction and induction. If deduction is following a set of rules to come to a conclusion from premises, and induction is generalizing from a set of phenomena to a general law. Um, Abduction, in some sense, is seeing parts and relations and continually sifting them until they come to an arrangement that makes the most sense. Um, and that's pretty much what he says you do when you plug and play and try to play test an intuitive solution. You can't just take all the analyses, even when you think you've gotten a solution, or when you do come to the real solution, you've gotten there by imagining um, what the possible meaning of this is first. And so, really, when you read something, you make sense of it by thinking you know what it means. And you just keep making that more specific the more you chew on it, the more you dig into it. And you'll realize, oh, man, it's so embarrassing when I look at my old annotations. I'm sure in 20 years I'll look at this and be like, oh, it was distracted, or it was inefficient, or I missed a lot of detail, or oh, I didn't explain a lot, or oh, I took so much for granted, or this and that. And I definitely did that on my old annotations. Like I'm like surface level this, surface level that, and now I'm like, I can't even begin to know what I don't know. I can't even begin to communicate all that this expresses. Every sentence has so many meanings and foci that you could like chew on for a little while and consider and talk about and question. And not granularly, I mean like expand it out and put it in different relations. Okay, anyway, now we're getting into more videos because we're not reading the text. Begin by imagining a plausible meaning. The last thing I'll say about this deduction, induction, abduction is that there's a lot of similarities between Bergson and Dewey around the same few decades. And in Arta's experience, Dewey says that we use aesthetic imagination to come to intellectual conclusions, and that it's very abductive, but that we notice out of all the phenomena and the noise and the data, we notice the arrangement all at once. What does that mean? Well, certain things arise in prominent relation to each other out of everything else. Um, what do you notice right now in your phenomena? You probably don't notice a lot of stuff happening in the back until I point your attention to it. Hopefully, you're paying attention to me. Um, no, actually, not me. You're paying attention to the text and following or dialoguing with me about it. Um, that process of prominence is arising and dissipating in your perception. Um, John Dewey, an American pragmatist, says that that's how all intellectual perceptions work. So you make an argument because you notice the premises at the same time as the conclusion. You wouldn't know what was important, what you needed, if you didn't know where you were going with it. And this is also similar to I used to think in language a lot. I don't always use language when I'm processing mentally. Um, I don't always narrate to myself what I want to do. Sometimes I just intend and then move, kind of just try to at least because I don't like to waste a lot of time. Um, and the rabies tags are loud, which I like. I don't know if he wants to lay down or if he wants to come in here. Um, he chose bed, which is good for him. He should rest. Okay. But I used to think with more sentences, and what I realized was uh, when I start a sentence in my mind, I already know where it's going. I know what I'm going to do with the rest of the sentence. So there's no need to really think in sentences. You can have the perceptions of the whole meaning. How would you start a sentence if you didn't know what you were going to say? The instant before I said just that to you right then, I had a perception, which was only really if I focus on the perception so much, then I never have the next perception and I never produce. But I can kind of like catch a glimpse backwards if I'm really careful on splitting. I still move, but I watch what just happened. You can try that if you want. Um, and you can see this kind of duality, this parallel relation between the continually moving self and the ossified static self. Uh, Again, the point here is just the holism of perception, of mental eidetic perception, and of intuition, and how like things like language and symbols. Um, oh, right, I was talking about the way that by going backwards, you can catch the intuition itself before you translated it into a communication. Um, yeah, so kind of like by short-circuiting language in your brain, you can get to eidetics more quickly. Um, I thus give myself an intuition, and it is from the intuition that I try to fall back on the elementary symbols which would recreate its expression. The very notion of reconstructing the thing by carrying out operations on symbolical elements alone implies such an absurdity that it would never occur to anyone if it were realized that he was not dealing, would never occur to anyone if it were realized that he was not dealing with fragments of the thing, but in some sort with fragments of symbol. Just shadows, right? That really just don't. that only exist in relation to other shadows and take their form from the shadows themselves. Um, that, however, is what philosophers undertake to do when they seek to recompose the person with psychological states, whether they confine themselves to these states or whether they add a thread for the purpose of tying the states to one another. So this goes to Plato. Plato says that education is not about depositing knowledge in students, it's about turning their attention to working through the practices on their own. Empiricists and rationalists alike are in this case dupes of the same illusion. Both take the partial notions for real parts, thus confusing the point of view of analysis and that of intuition, science, and metaphysics. The empiricists are right in saying that psychological analysis does not uncover in the person anything more than psychological states, and such is in fact the function, such is the very definition of analysis. The psychologist has nothing else to do but analyze the person, that is, take note of the states. At most, he will place the rubric ego on these states in saying they are states of ego, just as the sketcher writes the word Paris on each of his sketches. Within the sphere in which the psychologist places himself and where he should place himself, the ego is only a sign by which one recalls the primitive intuition, a very vague one at that, which furnished psychology with its object. It is only a word, and the great mistake is to think that one could, by staying in the same sphere, find a thing behind the word. That has been the mistake of those philosophers who have not been able to resign themselves to being simply psychologists in psychology, Taine and Stuart Mill, for example. Psychologists, we read John Stuart Mill for utilitarianism. Psychologists, by the method they apply, they have remained metaphysicians by the object they have in view, right? For Bergson, it's science is fine to do analysis, analysis is fine. You just can't get what you're looking for if you're looking for what intuition can do. Looking for an intuition, through a strange inconsistency, they seek to get this intuition from its very negation analysis. They are seeking the self, le moi, and claim to find it in the psychological states, even though it has been possible to obtain that diversity of psychological states only by transporting oneself outside of the self and taking a series of sketches of the person, a series of notes, of more or less schematic and symbolic representations. And so, although they place states side by side with states, multiply their contacts, explore their intervening spaces, the self always escapes them, so that in the end they see nothing more in it than an empty phantom. One might just as well deny that the Iliad has a meaning on the plea that one has looked in vain for this meaning in the spaces between the letters which go to make it up. Philosophical empiricism, then, is here born of a confusion between the point of view of intuition and that of analysis. It consists in seeking the original in the translation, where it naturally cannot be, and in denying the original on the plea that one does not find it in the translation. So this would be to say that metaphysics is not real or meaningful because you're trying to do analysis instead of intuition. It necessarily ends in negations, but looking at it more closely, one perceives that these negations signify simply that analysis is not intuition. And this is self-evident from the original and furthermore vague intuition which furnishes science with its object. Science passes immediately to analysis, which multiplies indefinitely the points of view of that object. It is quickly persuaded that by putting all the points of view together, it could reconstitute the object. Is it any wonder that, like the child who seeks to make a solid plaything of the shadows silhouetted along the wall, it too sees the object fleeting before it? But rationalism is the dupe of the same illusion. It starts from the confusion empiricism made and remains as powerless to reach the personality. Like empiricism, it takes the psychological states to be so many fragments, detached from an ego which supposedly holds them together. Like empiricism, it tries to bind these fragments to one another in order to reconstitute the unity of the person. Like empiricism, in short, it sees the unity of the person elude its grasp like a phantom each time it tries to lay hold of it. But while empiricism, tired of the struggle, in the end declares that there is nothing else than the multiplicity of psychological states, rationalism persists in affirming the unity of the person. It is true that seeking this unity in the psychological states themselves, yet being obliged to put to the account of psychological states all the qualities or determinations it finds by analysis, since analysis by definition always ends in states. It is true that it has nothing left for the unity of the person but something purely negative, the absence of all determination. The psychological states having necessarily taken and kept for themselves in this analysis all that gives the slightest appearance of materiality, the unity of the self can be nothing more than a form without matter. It will be the absolute indeterminate and the absolute void. To the detached psychological states, to those shadows of the self, the totality of which was, for the empiricists, the equivalent of the person, rationalism to reconstitute the personality adds something still more unreal, the vacuum in which these shadows move. One might say the locus of the shadows, so a container. How could that form, which is really formless, characterize a living, acting, concrete personality and distinguish Peter from Paul? Is it surprising that the philosophers who have isolated this form of the personality then find it powerless to determine a person, and that they are led by degrees, to make of their empty ego a bottomless receptacle which no more belongs to Paul than to Peter? So Bergson's communitarianism or Bergson's way that we're connected to each other does not ever squash the individual, does not ever neglect the difference of the individual. That's the whole point of intuition, is to go into um, the individual thing and or person and respect their difference. So much radically so uh, that it's the enemy of fascism is lazy. Fascism wants shortcuts. It wants systems. It wants reductions. It wants annihilation in the final instance. It wants control. It wants manipulation. It wants to get more out of as little as possible. To find more value where there was not value before is capitalism, right? So the escape from that, that is the system which reduces the individual to nothing, which does not see them, which obliterates them. It is not the communitarian system that works together and cooperates with respect for difference, not a sort of you must sacrifice your life for the state. No, there is no state. There's a local experience that we are navigating and feeding each other. And so we're feeding each other and putting food in each other's bellies and roofs over heads. Um, okay. We can go for about 10, 20 more minutes. You'll know better than I how long it ended up being. So a bottomless receptacle which no more belongs to Paul than to Peter, and in which there will be place as one sees fit for the whole of humanity, or for God, or for existence in general. I see here between empiricism and rationalism this sole difference. That the first, seeking the unity of the self in the interstices, so to speak, of psychological states, is led to fill up these crannies with other states, and so on indefinitely, so that the self, confined in an interval which is continually contracting, tends towards zero, the further one pushes analysis. While rationalism, making the self the place where the states are lodged, is in the presence of an empty space that one has no more reason to limit here rather than there, which goes beyond each one of the succeeding limits we undertake to assign to it, which goes on expanding and tends to be lost, not in zero this time, but in the infinite. So infinite and zero are two extremes that neither one are the solution. Um, Truth is the movement between them. Survival is the movement between them. Life is the movement between them. The meaning of life, the purpose, all of that. Intuition, eidetics, and not just truth, but self-guaranteed truth that grounds other truths. First philosophy. Considerably less than is supposed, therefore, is the distance between a so-called empiricism like Taine's and the most transcendent speculations with certain German pantheists. Um, Pantheism is the idea that God is in everything, like everything is God. So immanence is related to pantheism. I'm not going to get into the differences between pantheism and panentheism, mostly because I'm not super clear on them. We can Google it real quick, but that's not a good solution. Yeah. So we're talking about pantheism. Um, but what's interesting is that if you want to equate nature with God and make pantheism, and if Bergson is critical of or he says that there's not much difference between pantheists and transcendent speculations. Um, then I think it just depends on where you carve the line. Um, but on immanence, right? Is immanence the rest of God that's not actualized yet in the future that could be, or the futures that never happen? Um, or is all of that just as real and inside of reality and nature as everything else? Is it happening somewhere else? Does it matter that it's not actualized yet? And in that regard, pantheism and panentheism are kind of collapsing. Um, but I think that in a universe where there's freedom and in a universe that is truly open-ended into the possibilities of a morphic kind of thing that you can create, moving into each instant forward, um, that's not already determined in the future, that is constantly generating and progressing and developing in an open way, not in a closed, determined way, uh, that would be panentheism. In a like that would be meaningfully distinct, where God is something, is the openness itself, separate from what is, close to possibility. The method is analogous in the two cases between transcendental empiricism, uh, or a so-called empiricism like Taine's, and transcendent speculations. I don't know why he's calling pantheist transcendence. I would associate pantheism with immanence. Sorry. The method is analogous in the two cases. It consists in reasoning on the elements of the translation as though they were parts of the original. But a true empiricism is the one, which is, we mentioned this before about a true empiricism, right? Like, so even though he's critical of rationalism and empiricism, he takes up a true empiricism, which is a sort of materialism that includes intuition and spirit. Um, and sense and consciousness and phenomena all out in the world. Okay. Is the one which purposes to keep as close to the original itself as possible, to probe more deeply into its life, and by a kind of spiritual auscultation or listening, to feel its soul palpitate. So, in a way, the effort of listening is a perception, or the knowing is a perception, or you make good choices or you do the right thing by perceiving more broadly when possible, taking a step back. And this true empiricism is the real metaphysics. The work is one of extreme difficulty because not one of the ready-made conceptions that thought uses for its daily operations can be of any use here. Nothing is easier than to say that the ego is multiplicity or that it is unity or that it is the synthesis of both. There's a period there. Here, unity and multiplicity are representations one need not cut according to the object that one finds already made and that one has only to choose from the pile. Ready-made garments which will suit Peter as well as Paul because they do not show off the figure of either one of them. Green, again, the final, not the final time, sorry. The again with the green analogy. If I say green, it refers to lots of many different greens, and if I show you two different green things and I say they're both green, you can carve some distinctions: lime green, olive green, forest green, sage green, um, neon green, mint green, pistachio green, aquamarine, sea green, blue green, prismarine green. I don't know. You can keep going. Turquoise. Then what about within those? There are shades within those. Every single one of those categories has more shades. And you can keep doing that and think that they're separate things, or you can see, as he shows, that the the colors are on a continuum with each other, fractured by the prism of perception. An empiricism worthy of the name, an empiricism which works only according to measure, sees itself obliged to make only according to measure. See, this puts us really close to pragmatism too, a sort of like one-to-one proportionality between intuition and the thing itself. Sees itself obliged to make an absolutely new effort for each new object. This is why I said that fascism was lazy, that analysis is lazy. Each new object it studies, it cuts for the object a concept appropriate to the object alone, a concept one can barely say is still a concept, since it applies only to that one thing. This empiricism does not proceed by combining ideas one already finds in stock, unity and multiplicity, for example, but uh, the representation to which it leads us is, on the contrary, a simple, unique representation. And once it is formed, one readily understands why it can be put into the frames unity, multiplicity, etc., all of which are much larger than itself. Finally, philosophy, thus defined, does not consist in choosing between concepts and taking sides with one school, but in seeking a unique intuition from which one can just as easily come down again to the various concepts, something that resolves the contradictions and the conflicts. Because one has placed oneself above the divisions of the schools. That the personality has unity is certain, but such an affirmation does not teach me anything about the extraordinary nature of this unity, which is the person. That our self is multiple, I further agree, but there is in it a multiplicity which, it must be recognized, has nothing in common with any other. What really matters to philosophy is to know what unity, what multiplicity, what reality superior to the abstract one, and the abstract multiple is the multiple unity of the person. And it will know this only if it once again grasps the simple intuition of the self by the self. Then, according to the slope it chooses to come down from the summit, it will arrive at unity or multiplicity, or any one of the concepts by which we try to define the moving life of the person. But no mixing of these concepts among themselves, I repeat, would give anything resembling the person which endures. If you put a solid cone before me, I see without difficulty how it narrows toward the peak and tends to become a mathematical point, how it also grows larger at its base into an indefinitely increasing circle. But neither the point nor the circle nor the juxtaposition of the two on the plane, on a plane, will give me the slightest idea of a cone. It is the same for the multiplicity and unity of a psychological life. The same for the zero and the infinite, towards which empiricism and rationalism direct the personality. These concepts, as we shall show elsewhere, ordinarily go by pairs and represent the two opposites. There is scarcely any concrete reality upon which one cannot take two opposing views at the same time, and which is consequently not subsumed under the two antagonistic concepts. Hence, a thesis and an antithesis that it would be vain for us to try logically to reconcile, for the simple reason that never with concepts or points of view will you make a thing. But from the object seized by intuition, one passes without difficulty in a good many cases to the two contrary concepts. And because thesis and antithesis are seen to emerge from the reality, one grasps at the same time how this thesis and antithesis are opposed and how they are reconciled, because they both fit the source. It is true that in order to do that, one must institute a reversal of the habitual work of the intelligence. To think consists ordinarily in going from concepts to things, and not from things to concepts. To know a reality in the ordinary meaning of the word, to know, is to take ready-made concepts, apportion them, and combine them until one obtains a practical equivalent of the real. But it must not be forgotten that the normal work of the intelligence is far from being a disinterested work. We do not in general aim at knowing for the sake of knowing, but at knowing in order to take a stand, gain a profit, in fact, to satisfy an interest. This is why I said that Bergson is not, critiquing analysis in all situations. He says that it's necessary to sustain daily life. We, it is, and so analysis is intelligence contorted in a certain direction, or intuition contorted in a certain direction. So it's biased. It's not a thing in itself. It's our relation toward a thing, toward it for a certain use or goal. Um, we try to find out up to what point the object to be known is this or that, into what known genus it fits, what kind of action, step, or attitude it should suggest to us. These various possible actions and attitudes are so many conceptual directions of our thought, determined once and for all. Nothing remains but for us to follow them. Precisely in that consists the application of concepts to things. To try a concept on an object is to ask of the object what we have to do with it, what it can do for us. To label an object with a concept is to tell it in precise terms the kind of action or attitude the object is to suggest to us. In a way, this is what naming does too. So when we use any language, any word whatsoever, it takes the intuition, the sense, the perception, the phenomena, the experience, the direct experience, the consciousness, the quality, the concretions, all of those, and labels them with some kind of word that we can use to communicate to each other, find some shared assemblage of signs and references. And because the people using this system of signs and references has themselves had experiences, um, which these reference points can map onto, and they can make sense of using this language, um, we can communicate. It's a tricky task to bring up both the eidetics and the communication at the same time, the mind and the language, the inner and the outer, the intuition and the analysis. And when I say bring up, I mean to not um, make the intuition reduce to the analysis, and also not to only valorize the intuition, because then you can't do anything with that. Um, you would be the underground man in Dostoevsky's terms. Okay. To label an object with a concept is to tell in precise terms the kind of action or attitude the object is to suggest to us. All knowledge properly so called is therefore turned in a certain direction or taken from a certain point of view. It is true that our interest is often complex. And that is why we sometimes manage to turn our knowledge of the same object in several successive directions and to cause viewpoints concerning it to vary. This is what in the ordinary meaning of these terms, a wide and comprehensive knowledge of the object consists in. The object then is led back not to a unique concept, but to several concepts in which it is deemed to participate. So this is how philosophers often talk about Plato's forms. Uh, Different forms, which are distinct categories, are said to compose. Well, they don't compose the object because the object is significantly inferior to those forms and cannot. Um, the form of greenness must apply to um, multiple discrete things. And so if it composed this thing, it would not be around to compose the other things. Instead, what they say is that the object participates in the form. So kind of like overlapping spheres, Venn diagrams in a way. Um, how it is to participate in all these concepts at once is a question of no practical importance and one that need not be asked. It is therefore natural and legitimate that we proceed by juxtaposition and apportioning of concepts in everyday life. No philosophical difficulties will be born of this, since by tacit consent we shall abstain from philosophizing. I'm sorry. It's really funny. He's like, no, you guys don't worry. You're not running into any philosophical issues because you're not doing philosophy. It's snarky as fuck. I'm sorry. Caddy. Maybe we can say it's caddy. Um, but to transfer this modus operandi to philosophy, it's fine. He's like, you're just living your life. You're not trying to do philosophy, so you're not gonna, there's no issues. I don't know why that was so funny to me. I'm sorry. I sometimes there are these like little like sleight of hand language games that philosophers play. Audre Lorde actually says something really similar. She says that the non-effortful or the unconcerned are those who are not interested in determining their own outcomes. Um, I guess I find some humor in de facto defining, right? Like, well, you lived your life this way. You're not trying to do philosophy. Like that's kind of what was funny to me is the de facto um, state of it all. To transfer this modus operandi to philosophy, to go here again from concepts to the thing, to employ for the disinterested knowledge of an object, one now aims at attaining in itself a manner of knowing inspired by a definite interest and consisting by definition in a view taken of the object externally, is to turn one's back on the goal at which one was aiming to philosophize, to develop an intuition. It is to condemn philosophy to an internal friction between the schools and set up a contradiction in the very heart of the object and the method. Either there is no philosophy possible, and all knowledge of things is a practical knowledge turned to the profit to be gained from them, or philosophizing consists in placing oneself within the object itself by an effort of intuition. But in order to comprehend the nature of this intuition, to determine precisely where intuition ends and analysis begins, we must return to what was said above concerning the flow of duration. Okay. I think it's been about 45, if not 55 minutes, so I want to wrap it here. Um, We're at the bottom, second to last paragraph at the bottom of page 151, and we're gonna keep it moving. See you guys soon. Thanks for being here. No pets in this one. Um, yeah, hang in there. We'll probably make it a 7-part series. I think we'll wrap by then. All right, see you guys.